Bioware has been under fire lately. Andromeda has a lot of things fundamentally wrong with it, from broken animations to repetitive single-player MMO-style gameplay, but even at its core, it's just a repetition of Knights of the Old Republic's major plot points, similar to how the first Mass Effect before it did the exact same. It's just told a lot worse. This isn't surprising. The turning point for storytelling in Bioware games, at least to me, has always been between Dragon Age Origin and Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age Origins comes across as a love letter to fantasy fiction of the past few decades. It doesn't just copy one realm and stick with it, it copies almost all of them and mixes them together into something unified that works. You've got your corruption spreading through nature, your 1 in 100 surviving hero class, your political strife sidestepping the real issues to focus on who gets to sit on what throne, as the entire country just falls apart. You've got your magic tower and the commoner's fear of what goes on in there. None of this is original, but it's so well executed and especially stood out at the time for being used as a backdrop in a game of that order. Dragon Age 2, however, appears to be written by someone not aware of cliches or plotlines generally appearing in fiction and stumbles through them blindly. There's a lot of cliches writers fall for when they don't have the experience or understanding of what they're doing. This is okay, as it becomes a learning experience. The more you write, the better you understand how things tie together, and the more you explore possibilities with storytelling in depth later on. Putting inexperienced writers front and center with a massive project following what's shaping up to be a large franchise, that's a terrible idea. One of the biggest reasons often attributed to the quality of Dragon Age 2 is that it was rushed, and while that's definitely showing, especially from a gameplay perspective, I don't think more time in the oven would have led to a better story either. The entire base premise a lot of the story hinged on was fundamentally broken to begin with. Dragon Age Origins had a formula to how most of the storyline's quests worked out. It was simple yet effective. You, the Grey Warden, arrive at a location. Something is wrong. The people here are facing a dilemma. A second party is doing a thing, and this thing is bad and should be stopped. You set forth to stop the thing from happening, only to learn there's more at play here. There's a legitimate reasoning behind the second party doing the thing. You can help them resolve the problem, or stick with the first group's judgments. Neither of these options are entirely wrong. You can follow both sides and justify your actions to yourself and the world in a manner that makes you the hero, or you can be a massive dick about it. Right and wrong isn't what side you picked, it's why you picked it. You feel like you not only made a difference in the setting, but you got a chance to develop your character and flesh him out in the process. Something that comes out even stronger by the different intro sequences depending on what race or class you picked, as well as the various ending scenarios. That is, until Dragon Age 2 retconned all of that by making your character alive and out in the world doing story things. The extremities of the endings and Origins meant that you could be dead, you could be traveling the lands with your lover by the end of it. There's more, but those are the two that stood out to me across my two favorite save files, as they were conscious decisions made by me before the game ended. In Dragon Age 2, you are always the same character, and your story always ends the same. In fact, the major story quests offer you no actual choices in most matters. Where Origin gives you the choice between two sides and a chance to justify this choice, Dragon Age 2 makes you defend people who stab you in the back. Most notoriously, the game's end comes down to evil Templars going after poor mages on suspicion of corruption, which turns out to not only be warranted because every mage is a blood mage and is possessed, but the leader of the Templars is also a corrupted blood mage. It comes across as two extreme takes on the same idea. In Origins, nobody is entirely right or wrong, it's shades of grey, and it's worked out well enough to understand where everybody is coming from. Even the character you chase most of the game as a villain has a sympathetic for the greater good undertone to his story when you get to the end of it, even if he took it all way too far. Dragon Age 2 attempts to have the shades of grey as well, but it becomes an incredibly shallow affair where there is almost no depth to any situation. Most twists come down to, and then he was also the bad guy in the end. You do get to choose sides, but it doesn't change who you're fighting and why, because everyone is wrong. One of the worst cases of choice not mattering in the outcome is the entire situation with your sibling. When I played, my sister, the mage, died because I took her down to the deep roads. The level of punishment seemed to come out of nowhere to me, and I wondered if I messed up somehow, so I ended up looking how I could have avoided it online. As it turns out, there's 3 different scenarios that could play out. If you bring her, she dies. If you bring her and Anders, he performs the joining, she becomes a Grey Warden, and then she leaves. If you don't bring her, she's captured and, well, effectively leaves. No matter what option you take, you lose a party member in a way that makes it feel like you were at fault for doing it. Fleshing out the game more over a longer period of time would not have fixed this. The game's setting, Kirkwall, is a static backdrop to the story, much like the story itself is on rails during a playthrough. More development time would not have fixed most of the issues with the writing. If anything, the writing might be the only part of the game that got enough time to be brought to a level of being game ready. And after Andromeda taking 5 years and still not offering a capable storyline, I think it's not hard to see where the problem lies. The idea of making a game take place across a span of time instead of a larger map is not a bad idea by itself, but in this case it ends up highlighting the lack of consequence of action to the world. Not just your own actions of you as a player, but Kirkwall looks as fine as ever after having been burned to the ground. This is something that could have been fixed with a longer development cycle, and it is a sign of the game being rushed out the door as soon as possible, but it's such a basic part of the experience where the ball is dropped that I think it's still worth bringing up. Not to even begin how it is retconned every single aspect of what you did during your journey in Origins. Allowing the old characters to come back into this game was a huge mistake, as something is clearly off about them every single time. A lot of the problems with the story could be hand-waved as Varric's storytelling being inconsistent and lacking in detail where it matters, since this is from his perspective. When you arrive at this level of justifying why a story isn't working, it's actually broken beyond repair though. Like how Mass Effect 3 was actually a beacon-induced vision playing out in Shepard's mind and not actually happening, or how the characters in Andromeda were mentally deficient undesirable, shipped off before the Reaper threat came to its conclusion so they wouldn't get in the way. The point is that the people in charge of storytelling in Bioware since around Dragon Age 2 have not been people who have experience or understand how to properly tell a story, given the medium that they are working for. Dragon Age Origins was made by people who loved fantasy and were good at writing for video games. A lot of the dialogue by itself is actually kinda lame and, well, it doesn't really work that well outside of video games, but for a video game narrative, it's actually quite successful. The story in Dragon Age 2 is just awful, no matter how you look at it. There's actually no justifying most of what happens in that game. And I think the same goes for the differences between Mass Effect 1 and 2, and then 3 and Andromeda. After EA bought Bioware and a lot of the staff left the company, it's become very clear that they've had trouble trying to find new people to replace them. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video and see ya!